and welcome to the left wing. Well, Andy Farrell has made 6 changes to his team for this weekend's game against Italy here at the Aviva Stadium on Sunday. Caelan Doris has been named the captain in the absence of Peter O'Mahony. Doris switches to 7 with Jack Conan at 8 and Ryan Baird at 6. In the second row, James Ryan comes in to partner Joe McCarthy. Finlay Beelan replaces Tyg Furlong. 2 changes in the back line. Stuart McCloskey replaces Bundy Aki and Craig Casey's in for Jemson, Gibson, Park. Rory O'Connor and Cian Tracey are here with me at the Aviva Stadium. It's not like Farrell to make so many changes.
No, if you go through the history of this fixture, even during his time in charge, he has made changes. Like, Casey started last year. Jack Conan, this is his annual day out, isn't it? He always gets running from the start in this game. And he's made changes to his bench at various points. Mike Lowry started in this fixture too.
Yeah.
Back to 5-3. That was kind of expected. I think that was a horses for courses selection. But Mike Lowry started a fullback here 2 years ago in this game, which was a nod to the future. But for Andy Farrell to make 6 changes to a starting lineup for a competitive match against an Italy team who took England to within 3 points last Saturday is it's a deviation from the strategy, just like the 6-2 split was last week, and it's a really fascinating selection to recall James Ryan but give Caelan Doris the captaincy is a big call. James Ryan was contender for the job on a long-term basis in many people's minds before it was given to Peter O'Mahony. Maybe reflects his standing in the squad now and the less certain place that he's in. We don't know at this stage as we speak, and we may update things later, but I know O'Mahony Furlong didn't train on Tuesday when we were out in Abbottstown. I know Gary Ringrose is struggling to come back from that shoulder injury. He's in a race to be fit for Wales, is my information. Bundy Aki is a bit of a surprise. Ty Byrne, is that resting? Is that an injury? There are a couple of questions we need to find out from Andy Farrell, and I know we'll hear from him on the pod a bit later, but overall, I think I like the fact that he's freshened it up, and there's a real challenge for this 15 players to go out there and beat Italy now, because the standard that was set last Friday night was so high. Now they got to go and back it up, because we've seen also with Andy Farrell that if you get your chance and you don't take it, you're gone. Yeah,
if it ain't broke, just go for broke and make loads of changes now. This is the new philosophy.
Yeah, well, we were debating this earlier in the week. Should Ireland make changes? And I felt like they should make changes, but I have to admit, I thought 2 or 3 max is all they would go. I can understand Rod's argument that, like you said, Sinead, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think the reality is, if he didn't make changes for this game, you need an injury for someone else, like a Craig Casey, for example. Craig Casey, if he didn't play on Sunday, is unlikely, you'd have to say, to feature in the Six Nations unless Gibson Park or Conor Murray pick up an injury. So, look, I think this goes back to Andy Farrell, how good and clever of a selector he is. I think, he'll have read the mood of the dressing room, everything you hear behind the scenes last week. I think there were a couple of individuals who were not too happy about being left out of the 15 and of the 23, but that's exactly what you want. So that's exactly what you want. There's a hunger to be involved in this team because, number one, they're playing such brilliant rugby and they're playing successful rugby as well. And I think there is a sense, even though the team probably don't want to talk about it publicly, but that there is another Grand Slam at stake. Most of them were involved in it last year. They know what it feels like. They want more, another taste of it. So I think it's smart by Andy Farrell to give guys a run. Rod's touched on it there. Perhaps maybe he wasn't planning to make 6 changes, but if guys are carrying knocks, then look, with all due respect to Italy, I don't think you're going to risk them for a game like this, particularly when he has worked so hard over the last 4 years to develop this strength and depth. So I'm all for it, I have to say.
Like that phrase, win or learn, Ireland backed the same team pretty much through that World Cup. Andy Farrell, through the last cycle, did make a lot of changes from match to match and kind of let injury open up opportunities for players. And the week after, it was very pointed that the week after Ireland went out, Rassie Erasmus came out with the stats about how many players he'd used, how much fewer minutes they'd used, and spoke quite freely about the fact that in the summer test series of 2022, when Ireland were beating New Zealand, he was in a 3-game series with Wales and he rotated his team. I think it was 12, 13 changes for between test 1 and test 2. Maybe it wasn't that many, but it was a big number of changes and they lost and he took a few pelters for that. But he did it from a position where he was a World Cup winning coach and he could could respond, but also he found players within that who he was able to bring with him through to the World Cup, and he felt that was a massive, significant moment in South Africa retaining their World Cup. So Farrell, whether it's the 6-2 last week, whether it's this decision here, he's showing a bit of adaptability, which I think is a good thing. And it might not work out. Ireland may could lose on Sunday. I don't expect it to happen, but this, they were 100-1 on before this team was named. I haven't checked the odds since, but if this weakens them to a point where they lose, well, at least they'll have found out an awful lot about a lot of players. He might get a bit of criticism about it, but he's in a very strong position with a 4-year contract to the next World Cup. He doesn't believe in cycles, but I think he understands you need to freshen up the team. I thought there was more players under 30 than there is, when I actually asked Cian to help me out with it, I think there's 5 players over 30 in the team, but he's taken a lot of the older guys out, like the guys who are kind of heading towards, even Cian Healy and Conor Murray are gone off the bench. The injury profile of this team, the age profile of this team suggests a lot of them will be around in 4 years' time. Baird has had a big season, big reward for his form. Conan, he played well off the bench last week. So he has a lot of players playing well. So this is a good way, as Cian says, keeping them happy, but also finding out more about them and challenging the players who played well to win their place back.
Yeah, just a quick point on that, Sinead. It's not just the guys though in the team. It's also like you've got like Jordan Larmour and Harry Byrne on the bench. So it's all well and good, like the guys like Ryan Baird and Jack Conan, who are senior members of this squad who are first choice for Leinster. But it's guys like, I know Jordan Larmour is first choice, but he's coming back in from the wilderness a little bit, and I think that's clever by Andy Farrell. I don't think there was ever any chance he was going to go for a 6-2 this weekend, because it's an unnecessary risk to take against Italy, but it's smart to bring a bright guy like Larmour back in. Harry Byrne as well. We were chatting about this on the podcast with Luke and Will earlier in the week, and the two lads felt that maybe Kieran Frawley should have got a little bit more game time in Paris. Look, there was extenuating circumstances around that. There was the yellow card, there was the fact that they went 6-2, but it's harsh enough on Kieran Frawley to be bombed out of the squad after only having gotten a minute in Stade de France. So I still think he's caught between two stools in terms of his versatility, because it's brilliant when you go 6-2, but clearly Andy Farrell, who's been a long-term fan of Harry Byrne, wants to see him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get a stage look, if Ireland around the hour mark, which I think we're fully expecting them to have the result in the bag, I think you'll see Harry Byrne and Jordan Larmour getting some good game time, which is no harm at all either. Yeah, we need to talk about Caelan Doris. He'll captain Ireland for the first time. He of course took over the captaincy when O'Mahony went off in Marseille last week. He has captained Ireland at underage level before, and in the under-20 World Cup in 2018 he captained Leinster for the first time against Ulster at the RDS on New Year's Day. It does feel like this is part of the grooming process for him to at some day take over from Mahoney in the long term, or whatever, some stage in the future.
I thought it was a very interesting. Virgin interviewed O'Mahony before the game in Marseille, and I watched it the other day, and it was ITV, I think, and they threw it forward and they said, Rory Best and Johnny Sexton made it to the World Cup at 38, and he said, I certainly won't be going on that long. So he has opened the door for not being around. Now, I wonder, as he goes on, will he just keep going for one more tournament, one more cycle, and see how he gets on? But I think this is good future proofing by Andy Farrell. Doris was a popular candidate in the public stakes for, I think, taking over. It's a big refresh. What is he, 25 now, that Caelan Doris? He was handed his first cap by Andy Farrell at the start of the last World Cup cycle. He was arguably Ireland's best player across that cycle. He's become such an important member of the team. He plays nearly every minute of every game. He's able to play in 3 different positions. We see him at open side here, but he did say after that experience of captaining Leinster recently that he found it got a bit on top of him, that the extra commitments, the speeches you have to make, the responsibilities you have to make, the extra media, he'll be up for the captain's run here at the Aviva Stadium tomorrow. That's all stuff that he hadn't experienced before, because it's very different captaining Ireland than it is the Ireland under-20s or even Leinster. So that's something he'll have to to understand. I'm sure he's got good people around him. I'm sure Gary Keegan, both his parents are psychologists, so I'm sure he's got a bit of help there. He's a deep thinker. He'll put a lot of effort into it. It's a huge honour for him, but he leads by his example when he's out there. He's different to O'Mahony in terms of personality, but he's a very forceful figure in that group, and I'm really interested to see how he gets on. I covered him at under-20s that year when he was named captain, and I can remember it still to this day, being struck by how much of a confident, not in any way arrogant, but of a speaker, a guy like straight out of school, he was put up for media in the PwC headquarters in Dublin, and it's not easy for these guys, like they've never done anything like it before, but I was really struck by how confident and measured and articulate that he was. So
I think this has probably always been, Caelan Doris's destiny to some extent. I remember he was saying that I think he missed Noel McNamara's call when he was ringing him to tell him that he was going to be Ireland under-20s captain, and his mum was dropping him back from Ballina back to Dublin, and he'd missed the call. So I'm sure it was a little bit different this time when Andy Farrell was asking him to be captain, but it kind of went unnoticed a little bit last week that he took over from Peter O'Mahony when he went off, and Ireland's fifth try came from Caelan Doris's call to go for the corner, because Craig Casey was already on the pitch with the tee, and my sense of that, I watched it back a couple of times, was that maybe the call came from the coach's box, even though, to be fair to Andy Farrell, he does strike me as a coach who does let the players make the decision. But because Doris had already called to Carl Dixon, the referee, that they wanted to go for the corner, it meant that the decision was overruled in terms of the tee already being on the pitch. But that was... I know it's a small thing and the result was beyond any doubt, but if you look back at the clip, France are on their haunches, they're out on their feet, and Doris, I'm sure, is blowing hard as well, but he sensed an opportunity to go for another try. They already had the bonus point. This championship could come down to points difference, but I thought that was a big show of his leadership at, what was still a big game and a raucous atmosphere and all that. But as well as the captaincy, he's also got to deal with playing in a position that he's not all that familiar with. I know he's done it for Leinster at open side a few times. Look, it frustrates me at times, I have to say, when Doris is moved from number 8, because I think along with Ardie Surveyor and Greg Aldridge, who he clearly outplayed last week, I think he's one of the best number 8s in the world. So I understand the need to get your best players on the pitch, but
do you not think it's worth the payoff then, having Conan in there?
I think it is, and I think Conan was exceptional when he came off the bench last week, but I just think you lose a little bit when you move Caelan Doris. I think it's fine for a game like Italy because you're packed full of ball carriers in that pack, but when it comes to the big games, I just much prefer when Caelan Doris is at number 8, but I suppose it's a sign of his quality that he is able to play 6, 7 and 8 pretty comfortably. So he's going to have to adjust to that as well as taking on the captaincy, but I think he's going to be able for it.
What about the rest of the composition of the back row? Obviously Ryan Baird is in there. He kind of has the thing with Italy, he made his debut against them back in, in 2001. A year later he started against them here. He scored his first try for Ireland. He was on the bench last year, replaced Ian Henderson, and made such an impact in Rome in that kamikaze kind of game. Do you like the look of that?
Yeah, Ryan Baird's had a very interesting Ireland career in that he's had 2 really good Six Nations campaigns that probably were springboarded from playing against Italy in Rome, actually, because he effectively won the match for Ireland in a really sticky game in Murrayfield a couple of weeks later. He had a charge down, he had a couple of big plays in the last couple of minutes when Ireland were at risk of losing a game to Scotland at a time when Andy Farrell was under tremendous pressure for his job. It's hard to believe now. A year later he wasn't involved very, very much, but then 2 years on he starts against England in the Grand Slam on the back of that game, and then he loses his way again, and he comes off the bench against South Africa last at the World Cup, but then doesn't play in either of the. He gets usurped by Joe McCarthy effectively for the New Zealand game, and now he's back. And in fairness, his response to losing his place for Ireland.
When you say he lost his way a bit, how do you mean?
Or was it just within the squad? I think the coaches have had question marks over his kind of mental application. I think there's no doubting his physical gifts, but his ability to stay consistent for 80 minutes of a performance, not to switch off, he's talked about it himself, is something that doesn't necessarily come naturally to him, and something he's had to work really, really hard of. I sat down with him, must be a year and a half ago now, and he's very good at articulating what he needs to do to get better, but then I guess you have to follow that up and put it all into practice. But what he's done since he got back is, in tandem with probably Dan Sheehan and Joe McCarthy, they've been Leinster's 3 most effective and impressive forwards. I mean, my main memory of the Christmas Interpros is him winning lineouts against the Head, and he comes on against France last weekend, and France are going for a consolation try. Who gets up and wins the ball? It's Ryan Baird, and it's not just his lineout work; it's his carry. Kick
chase has been really good.
Everything. Just the way he chases kickoffs, the way he hounds players, the way he tackles them in open field. He's a player that is making it more and more difficult to leave him out of any Ireland squad. I think he's one of the reasons they went for a 6-2 last week, was to get him into the squad, because his form demands it. And at 24, I think he's reached a level of maturity now where he's earned a bit of trust off the coaches. I think he has to have a big game. I think he should be aiming for man in a match. He should be going for Joe McCarthy numbers here, because he's good enough to do it. Physically, he was seen as a physical specimen long before Joe McCarthy ever emerged through Blackrock. So he has all the gifts, and he'll put pressure on himself. But I think the coaches will be putting pressure on him to go, you're too good at rugby not to be in this team. And he should be putting pressure on Peter O'Mahony, who'll be watching on a little bit, even though he's Ireland captain. He could be a little bit nervous this week watching. If Ryan Baird goes off and has a world goldie, then Peter O'Mahony has a job in his hands to get back in the team. And if Doris leads the team well, then there's an alternative there as well.
He was very good in La Rochelle before Christmas, which like is such a barometer of any rugby player. James Ryan was exceptional that night as well. But I agree totally with what Rod said. I think it's the nuts and bolts of his game, maybe the stuff that, you know, we all know he's capable of, the big breaks, and that's what everyone wants to see. But from a coach's point of view, it is that work around the line out. It is that kick chase, those little things. But I think Jacques Nienarber has been a really good influence for him as well. I think he probably sees a little bit of a Peter Steph Dutoit, like mould him into that kind of six, you know, a hybrid lock. And I do think he's far more effective as a six than a lock, particularly at international level. So look, he's still early days working with Nienarber. He gets to come into Ireland camp and work with Paul O'Connell. So like, he's got unbelievable mentors around him. I'm excited to see how he goes. So
no pressure on him. Just get a man of the match performance on Sunday. That's okay, Ryan.
And just like, I think Jonathan Bradley's doing our ratings of the weekend. We're looking for 8s and 9s. And like, he should be against Italy. He's too good a player not to go out and dominate this fixture, especially when there's so much personally at stake from him. And he's not alone. Like, you know, Stuart McCluskey gets his chance at 12. If he doesn't take it, you know, he's in such a competitive position. That's what's driving standards in this group, is the competition across the board. So it's not just Bear, but I just think he's such a fantastic player, and he has the capacity to he can destroy an opposition line out on his own in some ways. And he's got Joe McCarthy lifting him as well. So those two are developing a bit of a partnership in terms of being Leinster's enforcers. It'd be great to see them come and do that in an international setting at the Aviva, and then just put the pressure on Andy Farrell to select them again in 2 weeks' time against Wales.
Now, the two changes I was thinking of earlier this week, without knowing about Peter O'Mahony's injury, was James Ryan to come in and Craig Casey. There was kind of a bit of speculation over the last 24 hours that it could be Conor Murray, and it was the one call I was like, no, I wanted Craig Casey to start.
There's more value in playing Craig Casey on Sunday than there is Conor Murray. I mean, everyone knows what Conor Murray is capable of, including Andy Farrell, and I think if it was a Scotland or even a Wales this weekend, I think we probably would have seen Conor Murray, because that's the pecking order. Even though Craig Casey has overtaken Conor Murray, I think in the Irish coaches' minds he still has a bit of work to do. But similarly to Ryan Baird, what an opportunity for Craig Casey. He's played against Italy a few times. He's coming in playing alongside Jack Crowley.
He's made his debut against Italy along with Ryan Baird.
They've actually made their debuts all the way through the Ireland underage setups together. If you remember that picture when they made their debuts, they stood next to each other in the anthems and stuff like that. So he's coming in playing alongside Jack Crowley. I actually thought there was an argument to be made for Gibson Park to start on Sunday.
That's because he's written a feature about him.
Yeah, but just as well it went today and not tomorrow, because I would have looked a bit silly. But just to try and develop that partnership, you know, because if that is going to be Ireland's 9 and 10 for the foreseeable future, but
elements of his game has improved so much.
Massively.
You know,
he was excellent in Toulon. Didn't quite have it all his own way against Northampton, but it's a massive opportunity for him. And like I said, I think there's more to be gained from playing Craig Casey this weekend than Conor Murray.
Yeah, that Toulon performance I thought was a breakthrough moment for Craig Casey. Like Craig Casey, I equate him a little bit with Tom O'Toole, and even Baird a little bit, as lads who've been in a lot of Ireland squads without accumulating a lot of caps. And Craig Casey must have been at nearly every training session of Ireland's last World Cup cycle without ever really getting a reward. And once that World Cup is over, he's looking at Conor Murray's age. He's already usurped Conor Murray at Munster. He's got to be targeting that number 21 jersey and more involvement on match days. I mean, he was carrying the tee for Jack Crowley at the weekend. You know, he has to aspire to more, and I'd say he was one of the people who was pretty annoyed that he didn't get the nod last weekend. Well, again, what a way to channel that disappointment by going into the starting team here and taking this game by the scruff of the neck. And yes, we wanted to be more Toulon than Northampton. Northampton was very different night, very different conditions. Toulon was a beautiful day. His box kicking that day and Calvin Nash's chasing were exceptional, and a large part of the reason that Munster won that game was Craig Casey being able to play them in through his box kicking. In very much more difficult conditions a week later, I thought he was poor against Northampton. It was a bad time to have a poor game, but Andy Farrell, having seen him, you know, Johnny Sexton compared him to Johnny Wilkinson. What's that, 3 years ago at this stage? He's got to start.
That was after he made his debut, wasn't it?
It was against Italy 3 years ago. So we want to start seeing that at the top level, and he's got to be aiming to get Conor Murray out of this 23, which is a hard thing to do because Murray has so much trust within the setup. But he's the coming man, and you know, both of Ireland's established nines are over 30 now. He's 24. He has a chance to really be part of the setup for a long, long time if he can nail his opportunity.
Go get that man of the match, Craig. So just on the central lads, we need to rush through here so we can get into the press conference. I don't think anybody thought Gary Ringrose was going to make it for this weekend. We'll see how that pans out. So So
not if you're reading the Irish Independent anyway, according to Rory O'Connor on the ball, as always.
Well, it's just weird, like very strange week. I mean, Ireland didn't issue a medical update this week, which I thought was an interesting call. My information on Monday was Ringrose is out and is a doubt for Wales. Obviously, O'Mahony Furlong didn't train on Tuesday. I suspect they're being rested. We'll find out more in a little while. But the centre call...
what do you make of it?
It's a bit...
They played together here against Fiji, but Robbie Henshaw only lasted 4 or 5 minutes, didn't he, in that game?
Yeah, but McCluskey is a very trusted member of the squad at this stage. I mean, he had a very good Six Nations last year. I think
Rome was a bit iffy.
But that was because Bundyaki was outside him, and I think Henshaw proved... I had a bit of fear about Henshaw maybe losing a bit of pace as he enters his 30s. That's gone now. I thought he was exceptional last weekend. I'm not as worried about that combination because I think Henshaw can cover the ground. But Italy will attack wide. They'll attack the same. Ange Capuzzo's back. It's a big test for that centre partnership, but they're well up to it. I mean, Menicello being back is a really good player for Italy. I remember the last time he was here, he was in tears going off. His World Cup was crushed, but he was very good against England. They will attack that seam outside Henshaw, but Henshaw was so good last weekend. He looked like he's recaptured his physical, kind of got back to his physical peak. And then McCluskey, I don't know how it's gone since the World Cup, really. I mean, Ulster have been so bad, it's hard to critique any of their players individually because they're part of such a poor team. But he's
been one of their better performers. I think he is pretty consistent, you'd have to say.
He is most of the time. I think it was at the home or the defeat at Bath, wasn't it? He wasn't great. There have been iffy moments, but I think a lot of them have had iffy moments since the World Cup. So, but I do think Farrell rates him. He trusts him, and he's been a good player for Ireland in the last year. And the quality of 12s that Ireland have at the moment, it's a pretty good roster.
Keane, quick one on the bench. Obviously, gone back to the 5-3 split, as we said there. Jordan Larmour's on the bench. Harry Byrne is on the bench. Can imagine, good to see him there, but I can imagine how frustrating that must be for Kieran Frawley. Ian Henderson is back in there as well. But what you make of that makeup with Harry, I suppose, there as well. And good to see Jordan Larmour back in there.
I touched on it earlier. I think it's pretty harsh on Kieran Frawley, really. That's no slight on Harry Byrne, but we've seen this at Leinster as well, haven't we? Harry Byrne is ahead of Kieran Frawley in Leo Cullen's pecking order, and it seems in Andy Farrell's as well. So I'd be surprised if he doesn't get 20 or so minutes if all is going according to plan. And he's another guy that fits into that category of having to take your opportunities, because look, everyone expected so much of Harry Byrne when he first broke onto the scene. I think it's fair to say it hasn't gone according to plan. A lot of that has been down to injuries. His body just hasn't played ball. Even you go back to the New Zealand tour, he was due to start that first Maori game. His tour was over before it even started. Kieran Frawley started both of the Maori games and did quite well, particularly in the second one. But I'd say that was an interesting conversation between Farrell and Frawley. He's paid the big bucks to make the big decisions, but it's harsh enough to play a guy on the bench in such a big game. And I would imagine he would have known that, look, I'm probably not going to get a whole pile of game time here unless Jack Crowley or Hugo Keenan at fullback gets in injuries, but maybe next week is the time now I might get 20 to 5 minutes. So I mean, maybe there is an injury that we're unaware of, but it's harsh enough for Kieran Frawley, because look, Ireland could go back to 6-2 for Twickenham, and if they do, he is the ideal person for a 6-2 because he can play all across the back line. But Jordan Larmour's been going well for Leinster this season. I do think Calvin Nash was fully deserving of his place ahead of Larmour, I have to say, in the team last week. And he was excellent, fully deserving of keeping his place as well. But Larmour is another guy who probably become a forgotten man in terms of Irish rugby. I was over in Chicago when he scored that hat-trick against Italy, actually, ironically enough, what seems like a lifetime ago. And you couldn't not come away from that and go, wow, this guy is going to be a feature for Ireland for the next 10 years. And look, it just hasn't happened for him. I think, he became a little bit predictable. I think even though his footwork is sensational, he needed to add a few more strings to his bows. His aerial game, I still think, is a work in progress. Obviously, they tried him at fullback. That didn't really work out. His defence, I think, is still a bit of an ongoing issue, but I'd like to see him get a bit of game time as well. Ian Henderson, you mentioned. He's another guy, I imagine, who wasn't too happy. We bumped into him last week, didn't we, when we were in Marseille? And in fairness, he was putting on a brave face, but I'd say that was a tough, bitter pill to swallow, particularly considering how well he went at the World Cup. I know the New Zealand game didn't really go well for a few guys.
He was the first person to go up, and when was it Joe McCarthy came off and he came out on the bench? That. Yeah.
And to be fair, he was singing Big Joe, we better call him by his proper title, which I know Rudd has a big feature on tomorrow. Big Joe, big feature. But he was was singing his praises the whole time. And I know all these guys are professional, but you wouldn't be human if it's tough to be asked questions about a young buck who's coming in, taking your spot. But it's going to be a big opportunity for Ian Henderson to remind everyone what he's capable of. James Ryan is going to be calling the line out. The line out went unbelievably well against France, with Tyg Byrne calling it. It's going to fall back on James Ryan now, and obviously France you would have thought would have been a tougher test in terms of that line out. So if the line out doesn't go well this weekend, there's going to be major questions as well, and perhaps James Ryan not being captain and Caelan Doris will actually work in his favour, so he can just concentrate on getting the nuts and bolts of that set piece right.
Okay, well, let's just hear a bit of what Andy Farrell had to say at today's press conference.
Well, first and foremost, Caelan Doris, Ireland captain. Just what do you see or have you seen in Caelan to make him captain material?
Yeah, a lot, obviously. To put him in that position is a massive privilege for me, as I'm sure it is for Caelan and his family. So let's recognise that first and foremost. But he's someone that has been on my mind for certainly through the World Cup, and how he's come on as a leader, etc. And how he's dealt with being an international top class player over the years. His story, as it were, from being from his first cap to where he is now as a leader, as a professional, has been astonishing, really, behind the scenes. So therefore, we're excited to give him the reins and so let's see what he can do with it.
Andy, is there any players not picked due to injury?
Yeah, a few actually. When I did the press conference after Marseille, I honestly didn't know that we had a few days. It was only till the next morning actually that these were read up to me. So Pete's got a bit of a calf injury. That shouldn't take too long, but he's not trained this week at all. Exactly the same for Tyg Furlong. He's not trained at all, but he'll be expected. We've got a couple of days training next week. They'll both be expected to be back for that. But this was too bad. Pardon? He's
a calf injury
as well. Yeah, and Gary Ringrose is not quite right. I think he's another week. He's likely to be back into training as well. Next week.
And is the same calf for Tyg that was causing problems over the last while? Same leg.
It's a problem with the two, but this is not a serious issue. I'm sure if this was a World Cup final, we could try and push it to get out onto the field.
Yeah. 6 changes quite a lot. Maybe you're thinking behind bringing in.
Giving people another chance, obviously. The lads that took the field last week to build on that, but also keeping competition in the right places. And like I always say, selection it takes all sorts. All sorts of different permutations go through your mind. When you lose a couple of leaders, do you replace them with a leader or somebody that deserves a chance, etc. Ian Henderson coming onto the bench will help Caelan. I've no doubt of making sure that the changing room feels the way that it should be, with Pete and Tyg not being James Ryan's chomping at the bit to show his worth and start him, and Big Joe's ready to compete again, and then obviously Calvin Nash and Jack get another shot at it. Ryan Bird has been playing outstandingly well to start the game. He's obviously been very good for us off the bench. To start the game is a different challenge for him. Craig Casey's been jumping out of his skin and playing well and deserves a start. So for me, it's a hell of a pack and a good team at that, so it excites me being able to be in that type of position.
Now, Italy have also named their team, as we mentioned earlier. So Ange Capozzo's back. He was ruled out, obviously, for the England game with that bit of sickness. Tommaso Allen's on the bench. I thought they'd keep the Garbisi partnership, but Stephen Verney has been named at half-back. And we knew that Canone and Negri were already ruled out. Impressions of the team that they bring, and what are we expecting from Sunday's game?
I think they'll be decent. The World Cup has obviously coloured everyone's view of what Italy can achieve, but watching the Netflix documentary, and they gave more access than anyone to the Italian camp during that Netflix documentary, I think you could see the tensions mounting between Crowley, the team, Neil Barnes, his assistant, who didn't know the players' names, but like was the kind of star in many ways. But I'd say he was hard to take, during 8 weeks in France for the players who knew they were leaving at the end of it, and things started to go wrong. And I think they've had a bit of a reset under Gonzalo Quezada. I wonder, they seem to have simplified things a little bit, and they seem to have maybe aren't gone with a little bit more pragmatic style, but they still cut England apart a couple of times now. England didn't defend particularly well. They're learning a new system under Felix Jones, who's getting rave reviews over there, but it's going to take a while. What was it, 14 games? Jacques Nienaber is saying it's going to take for Leinster. Well, he's implementing the same system. So I think the Italians got great joy against England. They carved Ireland open. They probably created more problems defensively for Ireland than any other team in the Six Nations last year. That was a very uncomfortable afternoon in Rome for a more established Ireland team than is playing on Sunday. The forecast is good. I know the weather's been crap for the last couple of days, but the forecast is good here, so they'll get their hands on the ball. What Ireland will try and do is just batter them, and I think they've picked a pack to do that. I know Furlong's a bit of a loss, but Bealham has been good. They'll try and get supremacy at the scrum. They'll try and get supremacy out of the touch. They'll go after them in the line out, try and deny them that first phase ball that they're so dangerous on. Baird will go up repeatedly, with Joe McCarthy lifting him. That was, was a feature. I mean, there was 2 pods for a lot of them. McCarthy was throwing O'Mahony up as high as he could get him, and he can get Baird can go even higher. So I think they'll try and deny them that space, but they've picked a good team. There's a bit of youth in that back row now, like Negri's. I don't know. I mean, obviously he was the star, the guy they picked out for the Netflix documentary, but he does give them so much game line. And Lorenzo Cannone is a very good ball carrying number 8 as well, so he's a loss. But Lamaro's gone into that slot, so Ireland have moved their 8 to 7, and Italy have moved their 7 to 8. Garbisi's a good player. I think they'll be decent. I think they'll challenge Ireland. I don't think it'll be a runaway victory, especially with the maybe lack of established combinations in that Ireland team. But if you go to France and win by 5 tries to 2, and you're playing Italy the following week, you'd expect to pull away in the end.
Negri's a big loss. You mentioned there about him being the Six Nations star. Seemingly the cameras were following Ange Capuozzo around, who's obviously the poster boy of Italian rugby, but when it came to the editing room, I know it happened to a couple of Ireland players as well, Capuozzo was nowhere to be seen, which is a bit of a surprise, but it just shows you, I suppose, how influential, and his story was quite interesting. So in fairness, the Italians, they gave plenty of insight. One of the things that I was struck by was how little Italian was being spoken by the coaches. It was just like yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just found that absolutely bizarre. Even Sean Edwards.
I was wondering, were they doing that for the Netflix cameras? Let's speak in.
I thought it was very strange. Even Sean Edwards in his pidgin French was still making an effort, but you could see the wheels coming off. So look, for any neutral, it's brilliant that Capuozzo is back for Italy. I know the Irish defence might not be saying so, but what a star he is. I mean, not too many Italian players get picked up by Toulouse, and he's had a tough time of it with injury, but this guy is sensational when he gets going, so looking forward to seeing him playing too.
And it's not our job to big up Italy, but you'd hope that it's going to be a good game and it's going to be a good atmosphere here tomorrow or on Sunday, because 3 o'clock on a Sunday against Italy has the hallmarks of a fairly funereal day, and it's not great. So I think Italy pitching up and putting this Irish team under a bit of pressure might be no harm for the occasion, for the game itself.
Yeah, okay. Just very briefly, lads, the 2 other games this weekend: England against Wales at 5:15, Scotland against France at 2:15. I cannot wait for that one. There were 3 away wins last weekend. Very quickly, what are we looking at this weekend? 2 home wins, 1 away win.
I can't see Wales getting anywhere near England. I think Scotland can beat France.
Oh, you do?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, look, we expect a French response, but they're coming from a long way back, and the Scots, have troubled France in the last couple of years, and at home, I like Murrayfield. They've turned Murrayfield into a very good home ground. So I think 3 home wins this weekend.
No, I think France going to Murrayfield. I mean, I'd be shocked. I know all the issues that France have.
Like, their championship is over if they lose.
Yeah, and to lose 3 games in a row for this French team. Look, Galtier has stuck by Lukaku. He is under serious pressure from, I think, the French supporters. I was actually trying to just gauge a little bit of what's going on over there. I think Ficou was under huge pressure. He's a defensive leader. Dante was really poor last week. So I think patience is running thin from French supporters. And there was a lot of big hitters came out in the French media this week. Guys like Philippe Saint-André, Mord Boujal, piling the pressure on Galtier.
Couldn't wait to come out.
No, and they're all sitting there in the long grass. So I'd be shocked if they don't get a response. like they've picked the team that they should have picked to face Ireland last week. Cameron Waukey's back in, Louis Bire. Like, I was shocked that they weren't picked last week. So I think that actually strengthens France. I know they're obviously without Paul Willemse, who's obviously suspended, but Scotland have Rory Darge back, and their tails, you would imagine, are going to be up, even though they had such a bizarre game against Wales, but they still got that monkey off their back in terms of winning in Cardiff. But I would be shocked if you don't get a big response from this French team, and I would back them to win. And yeah, I'd agree. It's been Wales and England hasn't really been much of a fixture, has it, in Twickenham over the last while. You would love to see it be a contest, because I'm not going to be stirring too far from my couch tomorrow. It's definitely a day to be plonking yourself down in front of the TV and taking it all in. But yeah, I'd imagine England win as well. But I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid on England at all just yet. I wasn't convinced by them last week. Their defence, obviously, as Rod said, is a work in progress, and their attack, they're talking up this big game about changing their style under Borthwick, but I think we'll wait and see before that happens.
I just think with Wales, like, they're getting loads of plaudits for coming back, but as soon as they saw the finish line, they froze again and went back into this box kicking game. And actually, they've released footage of Gatland at half time and what he said to them, and he was putting it on he was saying it wasn't a game plan. It was basically they weren't winning any collisions, so they had to box kick. So all the kicks they were putting in were all down to the fact that Scotland were putting them under pressure. They start getting on top. They're playing brilliant rugby. They're throwing everything. They get within sight, and what do they start doing? They start kicking it away again. That is not a team that believes in itself at all. And go to Twickenham. Even bad English teams are hard to beat in Twickenham. I just can't see this Wales team.
It's also inexperience, isn't it? That Welsh squad is just such lacking in experience. They've got George Nord back, which might help, but I think it'll be a tough afternoon.
Okay, Cian and Rory, thanks a million for that. We'll be back with another podcast after Sunday's game here at the Aviva Stadium. So chat to you then.